We often think leadership comes from a position. The teacher, the manager, the president, student council members, they are leaders because they have taken a particular position that has authority. And that's what we call positional leadership. That's like the military. Someone has a higher rank and that person can order you around. But true leadership is what we call influential leadership. If we think about some of the greatest leaders of the 20th century, people like Martin Luther King, he did not have authority. He wasn't elected to an office. He didn't run a company. Later on, he ran a nonprofit organization. But he just said, I am a man and I want to see this change, and convinced a bunch of people to follow that belief and work together towards the goal.
I am here now with Mark Herschberg. He is a MIT professor of the Career Business Accelerator and also a significant figure helping launch new ventures at multiple Fortune 500 companies. Mr. Herschberg, how is your day going?
Going great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Of course, I'm super excited to talk to you today. I think there's a ton of valuable feedback and advice that you could provide to our audience in terms of not just entrepreneurs, but some kids, want to enter into business or want to enter into profession, and that's what you're all about. So for starters, think back when you were a kid. What kind of kid were you? Were you like a lemonade stand kid? Were you really good at school, athlete?
I was a classic 1980s nerd. I loved math and science. I was in the chess club, math league. I did do debate club as well. I did Odyssey of the Mind and academic decathlon, and I really loved school and learning.
And you went to MIT, so you must have been pretty good at school. Uh, when you went to MIT, what did you go to study?
There, I double majored as an undergrad. So one of my degrees is in physics. Another is a dual degree in electrical engineering and computer science. I minored in political science. And then I stayed on to do my graduate work, my master's degree, also in computer science. I focused on a field called cryptography, which is math based secret code. So it is mostly math, although in the computer science department.
After college, you went on to do a lot in business. How do you say those type of things like cryptography help you out in business?
It did and it didn't. So, on the one hand, cryptography is a very specialized field where we do secret codes. We figure out how to authenticate people, how to help you log in, or maybe even not use a password at all, but identify that's you and not someone trying to pretend to be you. There were companies I worked at where that was the very product we were doing. So, I needed to understand the field to be able to build that kind of product. On the other hand, there are plenty of other companies when I've worked in ad tech or building labor marketplaces or creating a financial simulator. I wasn't using any of those cryptography skills. And on the one hand, I've never used any of my physics skills, right? We're not doing physics as we're writing code. However, what I learned in physics was how to really think and problem solve. And here's a key thing to understand that I wish I knew when I was in school. Every class that you take has some kind of meta lesson, something else, something you're getting that might not be the knowledge directly. When you go off to college, for example, you're going to learn calculus. You're going to say, well, why do I need calculus? If you're an engineer, sure, you need it. If you're a scientist, but why do the rest of us have to take it? And it's not that we expect you're going to have to do integrals and derivatives as an adult. But if you understand calculus, you understand symbolic manipulation. When you've done geometry in high school, you probably said, when am I going to have to, for work, say, oh, well, how many sides does this object have and how many angles? What's the degrees of the angles? When am I going to use this? But geometry is not because we're going to ask you to calculate the sum of the angles. When you do geometry, you're doing those two-column proofs, right? You're doing, well, let's start with this, and then step by step, why we take the step, what that step means, and how to reach the conclusion. What we're really teaching you is how to do logical thinking, and that is going to serve you well outside geography. geometry, excuse me. Like when you learn history, it's not because, oh, you need to know exactly when the Civil War took place for your job, but by understanding the patterns of history, what has come before and how that caused the next thing to happen can help you make decisions in today's world and society and what that means for the future. So, all of these classes, everything we learn will help us in a larger way. Don't worry about when am I going to use this detail. There are larger lessons in each and every class that you need to take away.
That's actually really interesting because we had this I think he was a CEO of a vegan food company. Like they engineered and pioneered new ways of making non-meat foods like fish. And he studied math in college, like just math. And I asked him, very similar question, is you are a entrepreneur now, how did the math? And he was talking about how, well, a lot of math is learning those concepts. When his college math came around, he actually learned that there was a lot more to it, and how he could actually prove the existence of extraterrestrial objects through math and learning these type of things, which I found super interesting. So, you took these lessons at MIT, took them to Fortune 500 companies, launching these new ventures, and you helped create the Career Success Accelerator at MIT. Why did you decide to leave the main startup world temporarily and go help found this incubator?
Well, thankfully, I didn't have to leave. I am still a CTO, a Chief Technology Officer. I still build traditional startups. Sometimes I help Fortune 500s play startups. The teaching is what I do on the side. So I'm this rare kind of person who has a dual career. I have my main job, but then my side job. And I've been doing both for decades. And the reason we started doing this is because what we found is that the skills that you need to be successful are skills we don't teach you in school. Now, what we teach you, that's important. Learn math, learn how to use proper English, learn history, learn science. These are all critical skills. And if you don't have them, you're going to really have trouble in society. But even if you have all of those, even if you are a perfect straight A student, what's going to really help you be successful on top of having this fundamental knowledge are skills like leadership, team building, negotiating, networking. You've probably all heard, even at your young age, you've heard people say, well, networking is so important. It's not what you know, it's who you know. I heard that when I was a kid. But you know what? If this is so important, everyone keeps saying it. Why did no one actually teach it to me? Right? And that's the problem. They tell us it's important, but they don't teach it to us. So we started this class to teach these skills that we all know are important, but everyone forgets to teach us.
That's a really interesting thing because when you think MIT, you think, computer people, you think uh, all the tech entrepreneurs that came out of it that were learning a lot in terms of technical things, what's it called? Scholars at MIT. You don't think of these outside academic important factors to business. In all your experience helping startups, creating your own startups, and teaching this class, you must have encountered plenty of people who went on to do successful things. What's the greatest trait that all of them share?
It is a drive to learn and do better. There are people who say, well, I know this, I get it, it's good enough. But the people who really succeed, the people, for example, I know one guy who went on to found a multi billion-dollar company. He's personally a billionaire now. I met him when he was 19. And I saw something in him that I've seen in a few other people who are, I saw all of them. I said, they are going to be super successful. I didn't know he'd be a billionaire, but I knew he'd be successful. I knew the others would be as well. And what I saw them was this drive to say, even when I think I know something, I realize there's still more I can learn about this, about other things. It's not being afraid to say, I don't know the answer. I am not the smartest person about this, even when I'm pretty good at, and I can stand to learn more because they are always improving, always questioning, always getting better. And that is a key trait to being successful no matter what you do.
You think this is a trait that's genetic that you are always born with, or is it something that can be learned and picked up?
It can absolutely be learned. And that's important to understand. One of my favorite books is written by my friend Olivia Fox Caban. The book is called The Charisma Myth. And in the book, she says, you know what? You can learn to be charismatic. That really surprised me because we think there are some people who are just naturally charismatic, right? These great social people. And then there are people like me who were not. And boy, I wish I had that. But, some of us are born with it. But here's the thing we know when it comes to, let's say, an athlete, a soccer player, we know there are some people who are just naturally athletic and some are not. I'm in that not category. But if you start to train and practice and push yourself, you can get better and better. In fact, for someone who is not a natural athlete, and by the way, is not a natural dancer, I was so bad I used to dance off time to techno. That's how bad I was. But I became one of the top ranked ballroom dancers in the US because I trained and pushed myself. And just like we can do it in sports, you can do it in charisma. Once you learn the principles, you can become charismatic. And in fact, this is true when it comes to networking, communicating, leading, all these skills that we call soft skills sometimes. They can be learned just like you can learn accounting or soccer or science. If you put in the effort, you can learn and get better.
And so this drive to always learn more, that curiosity, you could say, what's a good indicator? Because at a certain point, you need to take those lessons and go do something with it. What's a good indicator that you've learned a lot and now it's time to transition to the next step, which is executing those lessons?
It's often a continuous back and forth. Now, there are people who learn better by almost theory from whether it's a book or a lecture or videos. They take a lot in by reading. Some are better where, I just have to do it. I have to try. It doesn't matter if I fail. It's by doing that I'm really going to understand. In fact, MIT's motto, mens est manus, means head and hand, right? Because we think and we do, and it's a combination of both. And in fact, it's really about going back and forth between the two. Because even if you have a preference for one or the other, learn a bit, try a bit. As you try a bit, go back, and now that you understand the bigger picture, the theory behind it, and go back and forth. How often you do that really is up to you, but just find what works. But always remember, don't just do one or the other. Try to do both.
I really like that hand and head aspect of it. Just going back and forth, taking the best from both worlds. Let's get into your book, the Career Toolkit. So, first of all, your very first chapter gets off on building a career plan to get to your dream job or dream aspiration, whatever that may be. What's the key lessons from this chapter?
Most people don't have a plan, right? And this is crazy. If you think about a team project you might be doing with your fellow students, say, okay, this is like our big project, we've got a month to do it. You may just say, well, okay, I guess we'll come together in a month and hope we all did our parts and get it right. Or probably you've learned, hopefully your teachers have taught you, maybe create a timeline. Say, okay, we're going to meet today and we're going to divide up the work. What are you going to do? What am I going to do? And then we're going to check back in a week, and we're going to make sure that the piece you did works with the piece I did. We're going to have a little bit of a plan, because not having a plan, you're inviting failure, right? Having a plan doesn't guarantee success, but it greatly increases your chances. Well, here's the thing. Adults who are used to doing these project plans for their job. When their boss gives them a project, they do much bigger, more complicated project plans for a project that might last 6 months, even 1 month. But when it comes to their career, that's like a project that lasts decades. They don't have any plan, right? And that is totally crazy. It's like getting into your car and saying, okay, well, I'm in New York. I want to drive to San Francisco. No GPS, no map. I guess I'm going to drive west and hope I get there, right? That's not going to work. You might take the wrong highways. So you want to create a plan. Here's the thing, your plan is not set in stone. When you create the plan, you can change up the plan as you go. So don't be afraid saying, well, I don't know if I'm going to get the next 20 years right. You're not, but that's okay because 2 years into it, change your plan. A year in, change it again. But start out by having a plan.
So, what's a good indicator that the goal of a plan, right? People always talk about why you want to set realistic expectations so that it's more attainable, so that you don't get upset by the end of it. At the same time, a lot of people say if you set realistic expectations, even if you set crazy ones, you're still further along than the person who just accepted a mid-level end goal. What's a good indicator as to whether your end goal is going to actually help you or dampen your journey?
That's a really good question. And it's important to almost have multiple goals in mind at once. Sometimes at work, we have the goal and the stretch goal. So I might say to an employee, I expect you to produce 100 widgets this month, but I'm going to give you a stretch goal of 115. Now here's the thing, if you don't hit that 100, I'm going to say, "Hey, you're not hitting your goal. You got to do a little more work. We've got to figure this out to get your productivity up." If you don't hit that 115, no problem. We knew that was a stretch. I'm not going to say, "Oh, come on, why couldn't you do it?" We knew we were going to push you. If you do hit 115, fantastic. If you hit 108, that's still great. Maybe even hit 117. So we can have multiple goals. We can have a minimum, we can have a target, we can have a stretch goal. So it's okay to have two or three and be realistic about it. Say, I know I'm not always going to hit that stretch goal, but I think it's okay to have them. And then if you don't hit, but you hit that realistic goal, hey, be happy with that.
And a big part of hitting these goals is the everyday work, of course, that's going to get you there. And a big part of that is having efficient workflows and having efficient habits. Now, in this digital age, it's pretty distracting. You can't really sit down and have your mind entirely in something without someone coming in your room or something popping up on your computer, on your phone. What are your biggest tips on building these efficient habits and workflows?
It is the famous saying by Shakespeare, know thyself. Look at how you do things. And here's a really simple technique you can use. Let's suppose you wanted to start dieting. It's a concept we all understand. Hopefully, most of you don't have to do that. But let's say you want to start dieting. The first thing you might do is count calories, right? You're going to keep a log. Oh, I ate a muffin. It was this many calories. I had a Starbucks Frappuccino, this many calories. And suddenly you realize, hey, wait a second, that muffin, and we think muffin's healthy, but the muffin has as many calories as a donut, maybe even more. Wow, if I just cut out one muffin a day, I'm going to be saving thousands of calories per week. Wow, I had no idea until I started tracking it. That's what you want to do with your time. So you can just start logging your time. There's a simple technique you can do and just say, okay, today as I go, it's a little bit annoying. I'm just going to keep a log. I spent 15 minutes checking email and then 30 minutes watching TV, and another 30 minutes where I kind of just goofed off and really didn't do anything. And I did some chores, and just keep that log and you put together and see, where am I spending time? Am I wasting time? So a common thing people do when you're checking email every few minutes, right? Oh, I'm trying to focus. I'm trying to do this project. And then in the middle of it, I go, oh, let me take a break and check my email. Okay, now I have to focus again, right? And it's really hard to go from that focus to checking email that doesn't really take a lot of attention. And that's what we call context switching. You're going to see you do a lot of that, and that sucks up your time. There's something known as flow state. Flow state is when you're focused, right? Think about if you're writing a term paper. You just have to be in it, right? You have to be focused and concentrating. And when suddenly your mom calls you with a question or you look at an email, you break out of the flow state and it takes time to get back into it. As opposed to if, for example, you're washing dishes, you can wash dishes, take a break for 2 minutes, come back to washing dishes. It's not like you're washing dishes less efficiently. Or if you're checking email, you're going from one email to another. They're usually not deep attention. It's kind of like, oh, let's get together at the mall next Tuesday at 5. Let's do this. So you can do that in small bursts. So you want to take, when you've mapped everything out, look for these groups where it takes that deep attention. Your homework, for example, thinking about something, starting your business where you have to focus and concentrate, and try to provide uninterrupted blocks for that type of work. And then group together your text messages, your emails, your other things that don't take the focus into constant blocks instead of throughout the day. That's just interrupting that flow state.
In your career, witnessing young adults come out of your program at MIT and witnessing employees and especially new employees, have you noticed that it's gotten harder or easier to enter that flow state?
I don't know if I've seen a difference by generation or by age. That's a really interesting question. Certainly, your generation has grown up with a lot more distractions. Famously, my generation, when we did car trips, my parents would put us in the back of the car and we didn't have Game Boys or cell phones or iPads. They say, well, you're going to sit in the car for hours on end. I couldn't read in the car, so I'd just sit there and I'd have to occupy myself. And that's how we grew up. And you, obviously, you've grown up with more distractions. So I don't know. That's a really good question. I hope someone's doing some studies on that.
Definitely. It's a very different world, even in my short lifespan of just witnessing how things have changed. Let's talk about interviewing. So whether a teen out there is ready to interview for a college or your first internship, or you want to interview to be part of a mentorship program, interviewing is a big aspect of career and business and being an entrepreneur. And it's oftentimes a difficult part of it as well. Many people get nervous. Most people get nervous because it is a frightening thing because of how much is on the line. So, how can you leverage these interviews and turn it into something kind of scary to something that can breed a lot of opportunity?
I'm going to draw an analogy to something you've probably all had experience with: public speaking. At some point, you probably had to stand up in front of the class and speak before the class. And some people, they're natural at, they like it. For others, including myself, you could be really nervous and it's scary and you're not used to it. Now, I've become a good public speaker through practice. And for my public speaking, what do I do? Well, one, I practice what I'm going to say ahead of time. Two, I get feedback. I have friends watch me. If it's an important speech, hey, I want to try this with you. Can you listen to my speech? Give me pointers. Mark, you're mumbling here, or you're keeping your hands in your pockets the whole time, and that looks weird. The other thing I'll do is I'll watch other people give talks and say, wow, she's really good. Okay, why is she good? What is it she does well? Oh, she's very good with her hand gestures, or she's good at varying her tone. Okay, well, I want to incorporate some of that. Now, it turns out interviewing is a lot like public speaking. Most of us don't think of it that way, but it is. So, first, you already can rehearse your answers. You know what some of the questions will be. And if you don't, you can look up online and do a search for this job. What are questions I might be asked? And you know these questions and you can practice them. That doesn't guarantee every question will be there. It also doesn't mean, like a speech, you don't memorize it word for word. Oh, that question. Yes, I have been studying this in school for the last 2 years, right? You want it to be more natural, but by practicing over and over, you get more comfortable with the answers. You can have friends do a mock interview with you, or your parents or teachers or other adults. Let's do a mock interview. And by the way, you can film yourself or record yourself to see how you do. But one of the most powerful things you can do is actually listen in on other people's mock interviews. Get a couple friends together, take turns interviewing each other, or get a teacher or a parent to interview each of you, but watch each other. Because not only can you get feedback on how you do, by watching someone else, if I watch you and say, wow, you do so well the way you answer that question, okay, how can I do some of that too? So we can learn from each other. All the things you do in public speaking to get better, you can do for your interviewing.
Preparation is definitely so important. It can the whole frightening part of it does come down to uncertainty, right? Like, of course, if you haven't done an interview before and you're going into one without any of that background info, it's frightening. But if you know what you're getting into, it's a lot less scary. Next, let's talk about a huge aspect that you believe in, which is leadership, right? Whether it's a leading your fellow employees or leading a multi-million-dollar company, what how can teens discover and embrace their leadership style?
We often think leadership comes from a position. The teacher, the manager, the president, the student council members, they are leaders because they have taken a particular position that has authority. And that's what we call positional leadership. That's like the military. Someone has a higher rank, and that person can order you around. But true leadership is what we call influential leadership. If we think about some of the greatest leaders of the 20th century, people like Martin Luther King, he did not have authority. He wasn't elected to an office. He didn't run a company. Later on, he ran a nonprofit organization, but he just said, I am a man and I want to see this change, and convinced a bunch of people to follow that belief and work together towards the goal. That is true leadership. It's not by authority. It's not by saying, I am telling you to do this, but requesting, asking, inspiring people to come together to make a change. And what this means is that you don't have to wait until you get that position to be a leader. You don't have to wait until you're elected to student council or become this level in your company. You can lead from day one. And by the way, companies love this. The issues that I have in the book, the skills that we teach at MIT, I didn't just make this up one day. This came from companies who said, these are the skills we want in everybody, but we can't find them. We want people right out of college to be leaders, even though they have the most junior job in the company. So, all of you, Eve as an intern, you can be a leader by taking initiative, by putting forth ideas, and not waiting till you have some authority.
A big part of leadership is that motivation, getting people to believe in something and then ultimately do something or contribute to a common goal. And motivation is a lot easier said than done. It takes a lot to get someone to really believe in you and to get them excited about something. What are, three of your biggest key concepts when it comes to motivation?
It's recognizing that if I want to motivate you, I have to understand your needs, your goals, your desires. And a good leader understands that about the people she leads. What is it they want? Now, if it's a small group, if I'm leading a group of 3 people, I can understand you individually. If I'm leading a group of 1,000, well, I can't get to know each of you individually. But just generally, what are the things that brought you here? And it might not be one thing, it might not be equal in everyone, but understanding where there's motivations and making sure I have listened to those needs and I'm incorporating your needs into the overarching goal. So I think listening, understanding, and really customizing to the motivations of the people you lead is going to be really important.
That's a really key aspect is really looking at those needs. And even if it's a few people, you could talk to them, but if it's a group of people, really discovering what do people need in general and then making sure that you're doing everything you can to provide those things. Let's get into communication. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about business communication?
George Bernard Shaw once said, the biggest the biggest issue in business communication is believing that it had happened. It's that people, we have a conversation, we have a meeting. I slightly misquoted him, but we have a meeting, we walk out, we think, great, now you understand what I want. And I did not communicate it well to you, but I think that I did. And now you go off and do something, but it's the wrong thing because you understood something else. We see that all the time. Miscommunication, and it's not clear, right? If, for example, our internet connection went down right now, we'd say, oh, okay, I know you're not hearing what I'm saying because there's no connection. But then, okay, we're at least aware of it. Worse is when I tell you something, I think you understand it, but you understand the wrong thing, and I don't realize that. And so this is a key problem in business, that there are these misunderstandings, but they are subtle. And this can happen many different ways. It can happen with how we use language. It can happen in terms of the mental models we have. And I'll give you one of my favorite examples. This comes from a Saturday Night Live sketch. In the sketch, Ed Asner was the guest star, and he's at a nuclear reactor. And as he's leaving, he's retiring. He's saying, "Thanks, everyone. It's been great. Listen, before I go, I just want you to remember you can never put too much water in the reactor." So he leaves. And then a little later, some people are putting water in the reactor. Guy says, What are you doing? He says, "I'm filling it up with water." No, no, you can never put too much water in the reactor, right? That would be really bad. Guy says, No, 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 you can never put too much water in the reactor, right? Always add more. It can't go wrong. And that one simple statement you can interpret in two different ways. And the skit went on, and they went back and forth. And in the end, Ed Asner's on the beach looking off in the distance as there's a mushroom cloud as the reactor blew up. It's normally not as simple as one word, but often there can be multiple interpretations, subtle differences in understanding, and it's very important to be clear on that. So one of the techniques you can use, if I say something to you, say, this is what we have to do. Hey, never put too much water in the reactor. Okay, can you repeat that back to me, but maybe put in your own words? They say, right, I always need to be careful about the water levels. I don't want to be too much because I can never put too much water in there. Like, yep, that's right. Or no, no, other way, like just keep throwing more in. Okay, right. I should just constantly put water in there because I can't screw this up by having too much. Go, yep, that's the right one. So by repeating it back, but using different words, we make sure we at least minimize the chance of a misunderstanding.
Is this especially because of how digital everything is now? Is it more of a issue with lines of communication, like whereas email, text, it oftentimes gets even more confused, or is it more still the human? Just words can mean so many different things.
It's mostly humans and the fact that language isn't precise and just how we are. But certainly, we all know we've all experienced a text message or an email where we might think, oh, I'm being funny or I have a certain tone. But of course, that doesn't come across an email, and you forgot to put in the right emojis, so they don't know. We're like, oh, no, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to insult you. We certainly see those things happen as well as you get to these more narrow bandwidth channels. And by bandwidth, what we mean is right now on this video, we can see each other, we hear tone, we see body language. But of course, if we're texting, you don't see body language or tone. It gets different. So it's a more narrow channel. If we were doing it by phone, we could hear tone but not see body language. So it's a slightly wider channel, but not as wide as video. And even that's not as wide as in person. There's just that feel you can get in the room, right? You can feel the mood. Doesn't come across quite as easily on video, especially when there's multiple people. So that is part of it too.
That's really, really true. I mean, a few weeks ago, my friend got his license, and I texted him, "Congrats! Don't kill anyone." And after after reading that, it sounded a little bad to me. So I was like, just to clarify, this is the joke, which kind of ruined the whole thing. But that definitely is super, super, super true. Context gets lost really easily. And let's go into networking now, which is another one of those soft skills that's super important. You talk about why there's a wrong way of networking that a lot of people do. What is that incorrect way?
People think it's just about adding connections, adding followers on social media, adding people on LinkedIn, that's a professional social network, or collecting business cards. Here's a way to think about it. Imagine most of you probably aren't using dating apps yet, but you're at least aware of them. So imagine if I swipe right on Tinder, she swipes right, I go, oh, look, I just swiped right on Alice, we connected, she's my girlfriend, right? You'd laugh at me, say, Mark, she is not your girlfriend. She just swiped right. That's it. You haven't even talked to her yet. Don't call her your girlfriend. And yet, how many times do you say, oh, I connected to this person on LinkedIn, he's in my network, right? It's the same thing. Now, when I swipe right on Alice and she swipes right, what has to happen? Well, then we have to build that relationship. We do so typically by dating, right? And over time, we get to know each other. Same thing, whether you get someone's business card or you add someone on LinkedIn or some other social networking site, you have to build that relationship. It's not dating, it's not a romantic relationship, but you're building a personal relationship with someone. And when you think about who you can rely on when you need something, who are the people you really turn to? It's the people you've known longest, whether it's family or your close friends. Likewise, our professional networks. Who can we ask bigger favors from? People we've known longest, people with whom we have a deeper relationship, rather than someone you just met last week and got a business card from. So think about building relationships with people, not just, well, I've collected cards or added a whole bunch of people.
That's so true. I mean, especially now with LinkedIn and social media, it's really easy to see network as a number when it's really about the quality, not necessarily 500 connections if you haven't even talked to any of them. A huge aspect of communication is talking to strangers. And like we talked about with public speaking and interviews, that's still a super frightening thing for the good majority of people, especially young people. How do we escape that bubble of thinking that talking to strangers is difficult and just being able to be comfortable with that?
It is challenging, and if you're introverted like I am, it's even harder. So here's two things to remember. First, we often think about networking as at that big event, right? Some conference, some activity where there's lots of people, and that's where you meet and get all these business cards. But what we just learned, it's about relationship building. You don't have to do it in that big crowd. You can do it one on one. You can meet people and start to build relationships anywhere. So don't feel, oh, I have to go to these big crowded things I don't like. It's about building relationships. For some people, it's great to be in this large crowd and meet lots of people. But for others, if you just meet people one on one, that's fine too. That's a little less intimidating. Now, here's the other thing when you're meeting a stranger, and you want to start to get to know this person, which is one of the ways we build a relationship, ask questions about that person. And a great way for you to help explore your own future, your own career, and also get to know this person is ask this person about himself. Say, tell me, what do you do? Oh, you're an accountant. Okay, I mean, I get what an accountant is, but tell me more. What's it like being an accountant? What's your actual day like? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? What should someone thinking about going into accounting know? What do you wish you knew? What's the right type of person to go into accounting? How can I figure out if accounting's right for me? Right? All these questions that you're asking about this person. People love to talk about themselves. And so what you're doing is you're asking questions about themselves. They're going to love it. They're going to really like that conversation. And so that's going to help create a good relationship. And you're going to learn something. After learning all about accounting, you're going to say, wow, maybe I should think about being an accountant, or wow, this is totally not for me. Either way, you've learned something and you've started developing a relationship.
That makes a lot of sense. Just to demystify the stranger, it's scary, and making it no, he's a fellow human, and being able to put that connection super easily just by having them talk about themselves. So negotiation is another huge part of business, whether that's negotiating a salary, negotiating a position promotion, whether that's negotiating a business deal. What is your biggest tips on negotiation?
It's to learn to negotiate. Let's consider the following scenario. Suppose you are 25 years old, you're a couple years out of school, and you have a job offer for $60,000. If instead of just accepting that job offer, you use some of the negotiation techniques you've learned and you get $61,000, you up it $1,000. If you do nothing else in your career, if you sit in that job for the rest of your career, 40 years until you retire, you just earned yourself with one 5 minute negotiation, you got $1,000 more per year for 40 years. That means in 5 minutes, you just earned $40,000. But of course, you're saying, wait a second, who actually sits in a job for 40 years? No one does that. Even my parents didn't do that. And you're right. You're going to have other jobs. You're going to have promotions. You're going to have raises. You're going to get more than just $1,000. If you learn to negotiate, you can add tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars to your lifetime earning. And we're just talking about salary negotiations. You might also be negotiating with customers, with suppliers, with partners. We negotiate with our parents, with our spouses, with our coworkers all the time. When you learn to negotiate, it adds a huge amount of value in both direct cash compensation and just overall quality of outcome. So rather than just saying, oh, I got this tip from an article or tip from a podcast, it is worth reading a negotiation book, taking a negotiation class, maybe in college, or taking an online class, or practicing. You can start a negotiation club at your high school. There are negotiation case studies. They're not very expensive, and your school can help buy them, hopefully. And what you do is you role play. We do a practice negotiation. You're a buyer, I'm a seller. We each get our sheets. Okay, well, I'm trying to sell and get at least this price and these things, and you're trying to get something else. And we practice going against each other. And that practice, just like in sports or just like learning a foreign language, that practice helps you get better. So rather than just saying, oh, here's the one tip, remember to do this, invest even 10, 15 hours into that book, into that class, into your negotiation club, and think about how much more money that is going to get you in your lifetime. And I list on my website a bunch of great negotiation books that will help get you started.
I love that. I mean, I always have loved negotiation. It's fun for me, just being able to, even if it's over $1 or over. I remember negotiating with a friend in sixth grade. He was gonna start a handball league for the school, and I remember negotiating like, I'll help do some promotion for you. I get 11%. It was when I started watching Shark Tank.
And by the way, everyone listening is a natural negotiator. Now you say, yeah, I am, I love it. Other people say, oh no, I don't really like it, but it's natural for all of you. And if you don't believe me, ask your parents and say, have I ever negotiated my bedtime or how much food I had to eat before I got dessert? Every one of you did that when you were younger and did without any training or prompting. So you're all capable of doing it.
Definitely, even if you're walking down the street, whether to walk or wait for the next light, or if you're getting coffee, all negotiation. And on that note, there's really big perception that successful business people are cunning, deceptive, they break the rules, that they're not that ethically good. And in many cases, I guess that has proven to be true, but I would say more than not, people who do in business are good people. Why is business ethics so important?
We have seen over time that people are getting more and more concerned about not just the bottom line, not just money, but they do care about ethics. They do care about impact on the world. Your generation more than mine, and mine more than my parents, care about things like global warming, like corporate social responsibility. What are we doing to help people and not just make money? And it's important that we start to really incorporate this into what we do. And that's especially true as we get to these new advanced technologies. So consider, for example, we have all these electronic technologies, we have machine learning, we have artificial intelligence. These are going to make decisions. So a very simple example, we're looking at driverless cars, right? In our lifetimes, we will see driverless cars. At some point, a car is going to have to skid out of control. It's going to happen, right? There will be an accident. That car needs to make a decision. Now, humans will naturally say, okay, well, I'm driving the car. I'm going to try to save myself. But what if the car says, I've got one person in the car and there's four people standing over there. So I can either steer to the right, go over the edge of the cliff and kill the one person in the car, or steer into those four people and kill the four, but save the driver. What's the right decision? There may or may not be a right answer. We can have a debate about that. but we are making a decision about what to do. And a lot of what we do, even when we produce some particular item, what does that do to the recycling chain? What does that do to the garbage in the ocean? Do we have a responsibility to think about that? And the answer more and more is becoming yes. So we really need to incorporate that into our thinking and ask of ourselves, of the companies we work for, and the companies we buy from, ask them to do the same.
Are you worried that, like you said, with driverless cars, when the decisions are being made by big companies led by people, are you worried that because of how centralized it is, the bad ethics of a few at the top are going to ripple down into the everyday lives of people?
I don't think the data scientists designing this are intentionally being malicious. One thing we often see in data science, we see that bad input creates bad output. So let me give you an example. There was a terrible practice back in the 20th century called redlining. And what would happen is banks and others would draw a red line around a neighborhood, and they'd say, okay, well, this neighborhood is only for people of this particular race, and then this neighborhood's for people of another race. And if you were in the wrong race trying to get a home loan, oh, turns out you don't qualify, right? The bank would come up with some reason why you couldn't qualify. So then we have people are historically, we see neighborhoods have had different racial composition for historical reasons. Well, as we've moved from some human deciding whether you get a loan to some algorithm, the algorithm says, well, how do I decide if someone should get a loan? Well, let's look at the historical data. Let's look at things like zip code. And even though race is not put in as part of the decision making process, it is illegal for them to ask your race on a home loan application. They can and do ask your zip code. Not that they're trying to be malicious, but your zip code effectively corresponds to your race in some neighborhoods. And the algorithms wind up saying, oh, well, this particular neighborhood tends to have lower outcomes, higher risk, and we're less likely to give a loan or a loan at a higher rate. And that winds up being effectively the same as judging people based on race. No one was trying to do that. I don't think any bank today was saying, how do we treat people by different races differently? But the data they've used has a historical bias in it, and that causes that bias to continue forward. And those are the issues that we tend to be facing when it comes to machine learning. But there's just a number of other issues in corporations as well. Consider if you are doing something that results in a $50 fine, but if you do it, you can make 500 in profit. Well, wait a second, I can do that math. I'm going to make $500 and I'm going to pay 50, so I'm going to make 450. Yeah, why not do it? Because I'll make more money if I don't do it at all. We don't always have the right alignment between penalties and benefits for certain behaviors. That's another broader challenge that we face.
And as a person who teaches at MIT, who's been through the school system, who is in the business ecosystem, in the entrepreneur ecosystem, do you believe that the school system is right for business people, for entrepreneurs?
It depends on who you are as a person. I generally believe going to school will help you if you go and study the right things and actually learn. So, what do I mean by that? The right thing can be pretty broad. It can be philosophy in some cases. It can be math, as the example with your friend. Underwater basket weaving, probably not so much, unless perhaps you want to start an underwater basket weaving company. But if you study and don't just say, well, I went to the courses, I studied for the test just so I could pass, but I never really paid attention beyond what I needed to do. But if you actually go and learn what we talked about earlier, those larger lessons, if you start to incorporate that and understand it, I think that can set you up for success. Now, certainly we know there are some people for whom they didn't need school, right? We know Bill Gates dropped out of school. That was the right decision. Will Smith the actor and rapper, he forwent college because he said, you know what? He got accepted to college, but he said, I think I have a good acting career and I don't want to miss this opportunity. And that was obviously the right decision for him. You have to decide what's right for you. On average, without knowing you, I know that the statistics say if you go to college, you're going to get a better outcome than if you don't. You might be the exception. Only you can decide. But I'd recommend getting some college education. And if you want to delay that a little, try a business at first for a year when you're 18 or intersperse it. I think that's totally fine.
My last question to you is that if you could go back to when you were a kid and tell yourself one piece of advice or lesson, what would that be?
The STEM skills are important, but these other skills, leadership, communicating, networking, team building, are actually very important too. So don't discount them. I wish I knew that when I was younger.
This was amazing. Definitely, those soft skills are coming more and more and more into play in the business world every single day. Thank you, Mr. Hershberg, for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. This has been great.